Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut, member of the House Intelligence Committee. And it is in that capacity that I'd love your thoughts about how we talk about what we learned. Is this, to you, an intelligence failure? Because it sounds like they knew. The report says they were preparing for war. Or is it more along the lines of a failure to connect the dots and prepare the people tasked with protecting all of you that day?
Well, it's all of the above, Nicole. I mean, of course, it was a massive intelligence failure. And if there's any excuse, and it's not an excuse, it is that, obviously the people who think about this stuff for a living had never seen anything quite like this. But look, there was plenty of indications on social media that people were planning violence, that they had looked at, graphics of the architecture of the Capitol. So, yes, of course, it was a massive failure of domestic intelligence. And it was also a failure to prepare. I mean, our national security and our police forces and Capitol Police and all of the associated agencies, they're there to prevent the worst case scenario, and we weren't close to preventing the worst case scenario on January 6th.
So the FBI director has been warning now of the threat of domestic violent extremism, particularly the white supremacist variety, since September of the ex-president's tenure. We now have an ongoing, I believe, 2 bulletins have been issued since President Biden has been in office. Tell me how the inaction around a bipartisan commission, in your view, impacts the threat, if at all.
Well, where Mitch McConnell is wrong, because there are other investigations going on, there are hundreds of prosecutions going on, where Mitch McConnell is dead wrong is that there's 2 critical pieces here that we won't get at anytime soon without a January 6th commission. One, of course, is exactly how Donald Trump and associated people, and I don't know who associated people are because we don't have a commission issuing subpoenas and getting to that, how they helped spark, how they drove, as Director Brennan said, what happened on January 6th. We need to better understand that. The other piece that is not going to come up necessarily unless we really look hard at it, and this is a clear and present danger to the Republic today, is how is it that there are still tens of millions of Americans who believe that Donald Trump was denied the election, despite the fact that there is not a fact, not one fact that substantiates that belief. There are tens of millions of Americans who today believe that the president is illegitimate. And there are people, I'm telling you, including some in this building, who understand the power of that big lie and who are just waiting to take advantage of it for their own electoral purposes.
I mean, Liz Cheney, for one, thinks that Kevin McCarthy has information that any commission or anybody that investigates it should turn over. Are you worried at this point about what is happening to any evidence that could answer those kinds of questions?
I am worried about that, and I don't know what Kevin McCarthy may or may not have. I mean, in some ways, we know the critical fact, which is that on the day of the January 6th, when Kevin McCarthy's life was in danger, the president said to him, well, maybe the people outside the Capitol care more about this election than you do. I'd love to know what else was said in that phone call. Yeah, of course, we do worry about evidence being preserved. But more than anything else, I'll tell you how I feel, and I don't think I'm just speaking as a Democrat. I obviously feel relieved that we don't have a president who is deliberately stoking violence anymore. And it wasn't just January 6th. President Trump stoked violence for 4 years that he was president. He just did it by, suggesting that maybe it was that guy's fault or it's this group, this immigrant group that is at fault. So even though we don't have a president stoking violence anymore, that toxicity, it's still there. It is still there out there with people angry. As I said before, people who believe that Joe Biden is an illegitimate president. We need to address that as a country. Otherwise, we're going to see, again, groups of Americans who believe that the system doesn't work and that they should come here and make political change through violence. And that just cannot be the country that we are.
You talked about the big lie and all the danger that it does. I mean, one of the dangers it is doing in real time is ushering in a tsunami of voter suppression laws. Republican-controlled legislatures have, I think, close to 400 laws that they're contemplating. 22 have already been signed into law. They're already on the books. The rules for the midterms have already changed. I know it's not your chamber, but do you think that, I mean, you guys did your work. You had a bipartisan bill to establish a commission that died in the Senate. There's voting rights legislation. Again, you guys did your work. It died in the Senate. Do you think that the extraordinary threat posed by the big lie should usher in a change to the Senate rules around the filibuster?
Well, I do. I've rolled around to the point of view that we ought to join the rest of the countries in the world that are democracies in not requiring supermajority voting to get anything done. You know, other countries don't do it this way. And I happen to think that in this moment, that's particularly important because if we can't deliver for the American people, if we can't deliver a good transportation bill, if we can't deliver on climate change and in terms of actually saving people's lives from a climate catastrophe, we can't deliver voting rights. Eventually, more and more Americans are going to say our government can't do anything. And that's just a very toxic place to be. So, yeah, and look, what scares me, Nicole, about what's happening in the states right now is two things. Fewer people will vote, which, of course, is precisely what the Republican Party wants, because when lots of people vote, well, they lose the Senate, they lose the House, they lose the presidency. But what really worries me is if you look at what they've done, they've basically handed power away from secretaries of state. Remember Brad Raffensperger in Georgia, Secretary of State, who probably saved the election in Georgia. They've taken power away from secretaries of state and put it in the hands of state legislatures.
Right.
They are setting this up so that next time they prevail.
No, I mean, and those are the parts of the bills that seem the most egregious. Voter suppression and trying to disenfranchise any American is heinous. The history of doing that to black Americans is one of the most heinous sins in our country's history. But rigging the elections is actually designed to have made 2020 turn out the way Trump's delusions said it would have turned out. Are people looking at, I mean, Arizona has done it as well. I think they've found a way to that would have taken Katie Hobbs out of some of her authority. Are you focused on those elements of the laws? I mean, what is the plan other than this seemingly doomed federal legislation?
Well, I can tell you what I hope, but I can't tell you if it's going to work. If you look at H.R. 1, and you say that it's too big, it is too expansive, there's too much in there, and let's face it, there is a lot in there. Okay, Senator Manchin, if there's too much in there, tell us what needs to come out for us to pass what is otherwise absolutely essential legislation. Don't let it die, because you're absolutely right. You know, the Republicans are out there addressing a problem that doesn't exist. It's important to them to be able to tell the American people we're securing our elections against fraud. Folks, there was no fraud. There was no fraud. And so they're not actually fixing the fraud problem. They're taking every step they can to try to reduce, yes, as you said it, the number of people in communities of color who vote, the number of young people who vote. They're trying to set this up so that they can rule without a majority of the American people signing off on them ruling.
Well, I hope you're part of those conversations. You obviously see it clearly. Congressman Jim Himes, thank you very much for spending some time with us today on All the Headlines.
Thank you.